To Be an Adventurer, authored by Gail O'Vaughan, narrated by Gail O'Vaughan. Prologue. For some, a normal life consists of finding a well-paying job and working dozens of hours a week to afford food and housing for their children. But for others, the best path is the path of the unbound, to have nothing tying you down, to roam the world with your arms wide open, taking on all the adventures that come your path. These few wanderers call themselves adventurers. The life of an adventurer is a nomadic one, to move across the world, exploring new lands, finding new people, and learning all about the world that is yet to be known. That is what being an adventurer is about. Some adventurers come together to form powerful alliances called guilds. Within guilds, adventurers are allowed to join up and take on the trials of the world together. Guilds are like a home for many adventurers, seeing as many don't have one. They evoke a sense of camaraderie among adventurers. One guild stands far above the others as the biggest and most important in all of the land of Laray, the Crown of the Purple Roses. Despite the name seemingly pointing towards the members of it being of nobility, the members of the Purple Roses Guild are mostly rough rascals with no manners at all. This leads to the bar within the guild hall always being the talk of the town among adventurers of even other guilds. The conversation usually centered around who fought who, and he said what to who. The ruffians of the Purple Roses often got into fights with others from their own guild, and sometimes other guilds. The loud bellows of the Purple Roses during any form of disagreement was more than enough to guarantee that no one, who wasn't already a member, would want to be associated with them. Everyone except for a young boy, Rota O'Harion. Rota, from a very young age, was always fascinated with the concept of the Purple Roses Guild. His father was even a member. Despite the fact that Rota's father, Montoka, was almost always out of town, he always made it a priority when he had the time to show Rota around the Purple Roses Guild. It was a large building, easily 7 stories tall, with each story being smaller than the one below it. Because of this, the building was shaped like a pyramid. On the highest floor, there was the guild's banner, and above it were the words written in gold, "A gift from the gods." The banner depicted a crown with thorns that had purple roses sprouting from it being set upon a figure's head. The legend goes that the figure was the founder of the guild, and that the people of the country saw him as a king, and he was gifted many treasures. One of such treasures was a crown of thorns from a rival guild. This was made to mock the guildmaster by giving him a useless gift. The guildmaster then placed the crown upon his head. The crown then sprouted purple roses. The guildmaster stood upon the crowd of intrigued onlookers and said, "I realize that this gift is to mock me, but I pity the fool who thinks of it that way. To me, this crown, now with purple roses, looks like a gift from the gods." The guild was painted a nice, rich purple, and on the accents and frame was an old, washed-out blue. The building was so large that it seemed as if it was a whole other world when compared to the small young Rota. The guild was large and expansive, but like most members of the Purple Roses, Motoka loved the bar. He even took Rota with him on the days that he was watching him. Some may say that Motoka was a bad father, but on the days that he had his son, he wouldn't drink a drop. He would always stay right by Rota, holding his hand, and despite the rough exterior of the Purple Roses, they were for the most part very nice to Rota. The days that Rota got to spend with his father were the best that he had ever had. He loved the Purple Roses Guild, and would even like to join it once he became of age. But one day, something happened, something that would change his life forever. To Be an Adventurer, authored by Gail O'Vaughan. Narrated by Gail O'Vaughan. Chapter 1. The Day That Changed Everything. It was a warm summer's day. Rota had finally reached the age of 16, graduated from his Academy of Basic Studies, and was now considered by Laray law to be an adult. He wanted to join the Purple Roses Guild, but his father was out on an expedition, as he so often was, and Rota wanted to see the proud look in his father's eyes when he joined. So he was waiting for his father to return. And this particular day was the day that he was supposed to. A whole crowd formed around the entrance to the city. People were standing shoulder to shoulder just to see a glimpse of the returning heroes. Rota, being a little on the short side, failed to see over the other excited bystanders. He pushed and he shoved his way to the front. He looked down the road entering the city. The adventurers were like little specks on the horizon. As they grew nearer and larger, the crowd grew louder and rowdier. At the point when the adventurers were finally in view, it was so loud as to make Rota fear that his ears would explode. He looked up and down the adventurers that had walked into the city. Each of them was holding a bag of loot, as was typical for this kind of venture, and one item that they had to show off to all of the civilians. One of them was holding a golden chalice that he would occasionally swirl around to pretend to drink from. Another was admiring a new shiny dagger, swaying it around to watch the light reflect off of it. One appeared to be holding nothing, though you could tell that his possession was a new bright blue medallion, as it was much too nice to fit in with his other apparel. It was nice seeing so many fun new shiny objects entering the city, but the longer he looked, the more Rota felt that something was off. A deep weight set in his stomach, like he had eaten a gold brick. The screams and shouts of the crowd didn't make him feel any better. Rota searched the group that had entered the city. Not even one of them resembled his dad. The weight that was in his stomach now moved up to his throat, as if to escape from his mouth. The explosive bellows from the crowd now felt like he had swallowed a bolt of thunder, and it was bouncing around in his insides. But in time, the crowd quieted and dispersed as the adventurers had passed and were all headed towards their guild hall. Rota followed them. He watched as each of the adventurers entered the guild. Rota stood there, just staring at the building. He had not been in since the last time Motoka was in town, 3 months ago. Since then, the building's trim had been repainted. Instead of the faded blue that in its later years looked closer to white as to be indistinguishable from it, to a deep crimson red. The new color of the building made it look huge and ominous. Rota felt as if something was wrong. This would be the first time he had entered the guild without his father. And the guild's new color made it feel less like another world, like he had felt of it in the past, and more like another dimension. Rota opens the large, gold-accented doors, and he walks in. He doesn't see any of the adventurers from earlier, but he knows where they all went. The bar. He walks down the few hallways that it takes to get to the bar. He still remembers from the last time he came with Motoka. As he gets closer, the sounds of laughter get louder. The presence of the bar can be felt all the way from down the hall. Despite the cheerful sounds coming from the room, Rota felt weird. The question still rang in his head. Where's my dad? Rota opened the doors to the bar. Immediately, he was hit with the smell of booze and hard liquor. Not a soul looked to see his arrival. Rota scanned the room, looking for one of the adventurers that had just entered the city. He spotted one, the one carrying the dagger. She was a tall, slender woman, with long black hair that crept all down her back. Rota raced over to talk to her. She was showing off her fancy new dagger to a group of very drunk men, who were interested in everything about her, other than the dagger. Rota tapped her on the shoulder to get her attention. She spins around, swaying her long hair across his face. A breeze of her perfume wafts into his face. It was like something that he could barely recognize, but still sweet and delightful regardless. He looks her in the face. She is beautiful. Her face was lavished in makeup, but two things stood out about her face. Her dark red lipstick, and her eyes that seemed to pass right through him. Rota took a moment to look her up and down. His father always said to be aware of everything when in an unknown environment. She wore tight black clothes that accentuated her chest and hips. She was beautiful for sure, one of the most beautiful he had ever seen. She hummed, obviously annoyed that she was interrupted from what she was doing. He stammered. His eyes met hers again. Her eyes were off-putting to Rota. They seemed deceitful, almost like a cat's. Rota felt as if he couldn't trust her, but seeing as how important it was to ask about his father, he continued. But before he could say anything, the men that the woman was entertaining had turned around and began conversing with some of the other bar-goers. The woman looked back at the men. Seeing that she no longer had their attention, she stormed off, very annoyed. Rota didn't trust her. He didn't want to talk to her, especially after her childish tantrum. But seeing as Rota didn't have anybody else to ask about his father, he had to rely on her. So, Rota followed her. He followed her into the corner of the bar. There sat a staircase leading up to the second floor. There were 2 guards standing on either side of the stairway. They let the woman pass. Rota, with no concern for the guards, attempted to walk past them. The guards blocked his way. "Only rank E members or higher can pass this point," they said. "Please, it's about my father," Rota shouted towards the woman. She didn't stop. "Motoka!" She slowed her pace. "He went on a mission with your group. He hasn't returned." The woman stopped and giggled. "Him? I think I remember him. No wonder he's dead. There was no place for someone as weak as him to be on that mission." Rota's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Rota's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Rota growled. Rota felt a hole being pierced through his chest. "What? Did you think that he was still alive? That loser was rank F. A wild animal could probably have killed him if it wanted to." She turned back and smirked at Rota. Rota believed that his father was exaggerating about his strength whenever he was talking about it. He even knew Motoka's low rank, but hearing this woman's slander of his father's good name affected him in a way he never expected. Rota rushed through the guards. They grabbed onto his arms before he could get past them. "Who do you think you are?" Rota screamed. Talking so low of an honest man, a hard-working man, a dead man. Rota felt as if his head were about to explode. The guards held the screaming Rota back. The commotion created invited some of the members from the higher floor to come investigate. "What is it this time? A drunk old man that thinks he's good or something?" One of them shouted while coming down the stairs. "No, it's a little more interesting this time," the woman replied. "It's some kid that's mad that his weak dad died." "Who was he?" another one asked. "Remember the dirty man with the hand-me-down sword?" The woman and the others burst out into laughter. "You mean Master Harion's son?" One of them cackled. "We should never have let him join the guild just because he was a Harion," another wheezed. Rota felt tears forming in his eyes. It burned like molten lava spewing from his eyes. "Shut up!" Rota yelled. "What's wrong, boy? Does the truth hurt?" the woman said with a twisted smile. Her eyes turned into those of an eagle's, cold, sharp, and powerful. Fear runs through her gaze. "Motoka was worth less than his bar tab. This guild would be stupid to accept anyone affiliated with that low life." Rota's anger cooled off and froze over with unparalleled fear. He slowly stood up and walked away. He could still hear their mocking of his father, but he was too upset to care. As Rota was leaving, he was stopped by an old man that held out his hand to stop Rota from passing. Rota recognized the man as one of his father's friends. The man had obviously had a few too many drinks. The man had been crying. He had out a book. The man could barely mutter a word. Eventually the man did manage to say something. "This is from your father." Rota didn't want to stay in this awkward situation, so he just took the book without paying the man any mind. Rota ran home. He had the strange book in his arms. Its weight was heavy. No, not really heavy, but its significance felt as if it were made of gold. Rota made it home. He lived in a small apartment-like complex. It was so small, he and his father had to share a living space. Used to. Now, to Rota, the small, run-down apartment felt as if it were too big to be only for himself. It felt lonely. Rota took a seat in one of the chairs in the small kitchen that also served as their dining room. Rota hadn't eaten all day. But he couldn't think about that. All that was on his mind was the book in his hands. He set it on the table. Rota didn't even look at it. He felt as if the book was so important that laying eyes on it might devalue it. Rota instead rubbed his hand across the cover of it. It was leather. Much nicer than any book he or his father had ever owned. He didn't feel any sort of image or artwork on the cover of it, but he did feel something etched into its surface. Rota finally gained the courage to look at the book. He saw what was etched into it was a foreign character. From Rota's years of schooling, he could tell that it was runic, an ancient language often called the tongue of the arcane. Though Rota couldn't speak or even read runic, he still recognized the letter written on the front of the book. It was the word for death. He could only remember it for the skull-looking shape of the character. For the first time since he had woken up this morning, Rota smiled. He chuckled at the irony that his father's passing gift would have death written on it. Rota opened the book, To his surprise, it was written in complete runic. My father didn't know runic, did he? If he didn't, why would he own a book of it? Suddenly, the runes began to shine a bright orange. Rota instantly felt stupid as he remembered that you could write spells in runic. He had never seen a spell up close before. The runes began to jump off of the pages and dance around his head. As the pages of the book turned vigorously, and the words of the pages soared through the air, the runes appeared to dissipate and dye the world a vibrant shade of orange. Then everything came to a halt. He looked around the new orange world confused. Then a yellow mass began to emerge from the floor in front of him. The mass began to take shape of a human. It was Motoka. Motoka took a saddened sigh, then looked towards Rota. "Hello, Rota. This is a prescribed illusion spell. If you are seeing this, I have died." Although not new information, hearing the words of Motoka's death come straight out of his own mouth hurt. As of the making of this, you are 13. As of the making of this, you are 13. And your mother, she... Rota winced as he knew what his father was about to say. She passed away a couple months ago. Motoka sniffed and sighed a little before continuing. I hope that as you are seeing this, you are an adult, meaning that I am going to talk to you like one. Rota looked away from his father into the floor. Finances after your mother's unfortunate passing are not great. My job is very dangerous, which is why I always go on such safe expeditions. But recently I've had to go on more and more dangerous missions in order to take care of you. Don't be sad about this. Any expense needed for you is one that I'm glad to pay. But I fear that one day this may lead to my premature death. Tears began running down Rota's face. I am sorry for leaving you here alone so often, but we need money. I highly doubt that you will want to become an adventurer after seeing how difficult it was to support just the two of us financially. And that's okay. I just want you to follow your dreams, whatever they may be. I would tell you to go find some family to live with, but the only ones who I can name would be your grandfather, but I don't think he wants anything to do with either of us. If you want to leave this city, I recommend going north. Housing is a lot cheaper. Just know that whatever you do, I'll be proud. I love you. Motoka began to glow a bright orange. He then dissipated into the air. Rota looked around. The world had returned to its original color. He wiped the tears from his eyes. He closed them, and began to think. He still wanted to become an adventurer, though he and his father had hard times in the past. Rota did not see his father's occupation as a bad thing. Rota believed adventurers to be noble and strong. Regardless of what he thought about adventurers, Rota didn't believe that it would be a good idea to join the Purple Roses Guild. Rota sat there, nodding off to sleep. But before he fell into unconsciousness, he had a thought to himself. What if I did it on my own? What if I made my own guild? Rota then fell asleep, looking mournfully at the past and uncertainly to the future. To Be an Adventurer, authored by Gail O'Vaughn, narrated by Gail O'Vaughn. Chapter 2. To Whom Death Means. Rota woke up at 8 o'clock the following morning. He had slept in his chair in the kitchen. He took a look at the time. It was 1 hour before the typical reading of the fallen soldiers would be broadcast into the homes of everyone in the city. This was a tradition where an illusion would be cast, by one of the adventurers who knew magic, onto a stone slate hung upon the wall. Rota's home never had the money to buy programs to view upon the slate, so anytime anything would show up on it, Rota would get excited, no matter how morbid the material was. Today was the first day that Rota was not looking forward to watching the reading. He even debated not watching it at all. Rota at last got up from his seat to look for something to eat. He opened the cabinets. All he could find was an eighth of a loaf of bread. He hadn't bought anything since he suspected his father would be back by now. He grabbed the bread and took a seat in front of the slate. He waited for the whole hour for it to come on. The whole time he waited, a pit was forming in his stomach. This was the truth. His father really was dead. He knew it was about to be told to him officially. A blue glow emitted from the stone tablet on the wall. It illuminated the whole room with its glow. The center of the frame was Rota's grandfather. Rota was surprised. He had never seen his grandfather as the host of any of the readings. The crowd cheered at Rota's grandfather. He raised a hand, silencing them. He began to speak. On this day, we are gathered here to mourn the loss of our fallen adventurers. I, Oji Harion, of the Crown of the Purple Roses, am here to do the reading. Usually, I do not bother with the press, but yesterday I received some news that someone important to me had died. I feel it important for me to give him my personal mourning. Rota hung his head low, anticipating his father's name. Shoden Sane, one of my most brilliant pupils, whom had gone on several expeditions, and made proud the name of Sane. Rota was taken aback by the unfamiliar name. Surely his father was the one worthy of mourning. The name Sane comes from the runic word for torch. I had meant to make Shodan even more legendary than myself, and to become the next crown of the purple roses. In other words, I believed that one day I would be able to pass the torch on to him. The crowd let out a soft chuckle. It is sad that Shodan was the first of the Sanes to die, but I suppose life is unpredictable like that. Rota looked at the tablet in disbelief and nearly stood up to leave its presence, but did not because he wanted to see what Harion had to say of Motoka's death. But today is a day of mourning for all of the fallen soldiers, not just for Shodan. Harion pulls out a piece of paper from his pocket and begins reading the names written on it. Rota leans in closer, awaiting Oji's reaction to Motoka's name. Harion pauses before reading off Motoka's name. Motoka O'Harion. I had no clue. Rota is shocked at the lack of care given to Motoka's death by Oji. Harion continues to read the names off of the list. Once he was finished, Harion concluded the event with a small speech. To everyone here in person, and to those of you watching at home, thank you. There are very few people who call these brave adventurers family, except for their guilds. Some of the men and women who die out on expeditions do so for a better life. They all try their hardest, and even though most of these adventurers die without a single piece of gold to their name, we still need to celebrate them. After all, everything that our guild and this city becomes is all because of people like them. Rota was no longer listening. He had already gotten up and gone over to his father's dresser. He picked up the small bag of money that Motoka had left him before the last expedition. He opened it and laid the coins on the counter. He counted them out, 2 silver coins and 10 copper coins. This was enough money for now, but he would definitely need more soon. He put them back in the coin pouch. He grabbed a bag and put his father's book in it. He looked back at the stone slate on the wall. He observed a man who he didn't even believe that he could call his grandfather anymore. This was when Rota was finally going out on his own. Rota went outside, closing the door behind him. The town was already awake. It was loud, much too loud for the many thoughts in Rota's head to get in the air. In that instance, Rota had realized something. For the first time in his life, he was lonely. Not alone. He felt that before. This time he was truly lonely. During his childhood, Rota had his mother, his father, and his friends at school. Then his mother died. He still had his father and the children at school. Then his father took missions out of town. He still had his friends. Even after school had ended and all of his peers had gone on to bigger and better things in different parts of the country, he still had one thing: hope. He had hope that one day his father would return. He would join the Purple Roses with him and travel the world with him. Rota no longer had this hope. He was truly lonely. Rota walked along the busy streets, trying to gather his thoughts. Where will I go? Is there even a future for me? He then remembered an old friend of his. He was a bright kid, quiet, and very weird. He was a large fanatic of ancient runic magic. Rota even believes that he remembered the boy learning runic. Rota reached into the bag he had wrapped around his shoulder. He felt the runic cover of the book that Motoka had left him. Rota missed Motoka deeply. He wanted nothing more than just to hear his words of encouragement. Rota wondered if his friend could somehow reverse engineer the book so that he could hear his father speak once more. Rota remembered that his friend had moved to the common realm of Laré. He was just a few towns north. Rota then knew that he had a plan. Rota then pulled out his coin pouch. He felt how empty it actually was. He knew that he needed to conserve his money, meaning he had to walk instead of hiring a carriage. Rota made it to the outskirts of the city. He looked at the arch placed in the entrance of the city. It had text lining the top. The lettering was golden, just like the Purple Roses had on their guild hall. The text read, "Welcome to Purple City." Rota looked at the sign, knowing that this might be the last time he had set foot in his hometown. He paused for a second, letting the moment set in. Rota let out an exhale, then made his first steps in his new adventure.